Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to What's New with Web Content Management in SharePoint Server 2013. My name is John Ross. I will be introducing myself in a second, but in this screencast, we're going to be talking about some of the new Web Content Management or WCM type stuff in the next version of SharePoint. Some people refer to it as version 15. Some people refer to it as SharePoint 2013. But we're going to be talking about some of this new feature, this new set of features that's wrapped around web content management. It's probably one of the areas that there's been some of the most significant changes. So lots of good stuff to talk about, and I think that this is going to be something that this is going to be the beginning of a lot of other discussions. So hopefully, as we proceed through and talk through the sessions, it's going to spawn some questions and spawn some new ideas. And I'm really interested to hear what you all think about some of these new things, to hear what kind of content, what type of questions does it raise, what type of things are you thinking about now based on some of this new stuff. So feel free throughout the presentation. You'll notice that over on the panel at the right-hand side, you'll see something. You should see a question section. So feel free to ask some questions. I'm going to do my best to take and answer questions as we kind of proceed through. So please feel free to put them down there, and I'll do my best to answer everything. But this session is being recorded, so hopefully everybody has a chance to stick around for the whole presentation. But if for whatever reason you don't, the session will be recorded and will be made available online. We're having some discussion before we started here about where the recording is going to go and be posted. Not really sure right this very second where the recordings are going to end up, but keep a look on Twitter, and we'll definitely make sure that we get that information. But if you're wondering, how you can keep up or follow me on Twitter, I think probably some of you may have found out about this presentation on Twitter. But if not, at the bottom of this, there's my Twitter, John Ross Jr. I wasn't blessed with the world's most unique name, so got to throw the junior down there at the end. But my name is John Ross. I'm an MVP of SharePoint Server and a senior SharePoint consultant at Rackspace, working on the SharePoint Professional Services team. I've written a few books. Most recently, the Professional SharePoint 2010 Branding, which is definitely very much tied very tightly to web content management and the related things. And we are currently working on a new version of that. So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, hopefully will be coming to will be in some sort of book format that you'll be able to take a look at. Hopefully early next year. Also, there's johnrossjr.press.com. Take a look at that. I've got a couple recent posts that I've put up there about some of the content that we're going to be talking about today. So please feel free to look at that. Also, I am from Orlando, Florida. I know Rackspace is based out of Texas, but I happen to be down in the Sunshine State in Orlando, Florida. So if you're in and around the Orlando or the Florida community, stop by SharePoint Saturdays, whatever, and feel free to say hi. If you happen to be from Orlando, come out and get involved in the community, and we can always use more hands. But without further ado, I think it'd be good to jump into kind of what we're kind of the meat of the presentation here. But I think before we go too far into the presentation, it'd be good to kind of take a step back, and let's look at web content management in SharePoint. And I'm specifically referring to SharePoint 2010, but really there wasn't much that changed between 2007 and 2010. But basically, when we thought about web content management in SharePoint, we're really kind of thinking about buckets of content. You turn on publishing. You turn on publishing for the site collection, and then you enable it for an individual site, and it creates you a pages library. And the typical scenario would be, and we've done this for a lot of our clients, is that you might have like a news site or like a press releases site or like an HR site or something like that, and you generate your buckets of content in those pages libraries. So you go to the news site, you say create a new a new press release or something like that. You fill it out, you put some metadata on it or whatever, but then whenever you want to roll it up, the way that you would do that is you would primarily use the content query web part, or I'm going to abbreviate it throughout this session as CQWP. But the content query web part was the primary mechanism that we would use to roll up content. So all that's fine. I mean, a bunch of you are probably doing that today. I still do that for, for all my 2010 stuff. But what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that whenever you have these buckets of content, it presents some challenges in some scenarios. So a lot of, and those scenarios are mostly around limited content reuse and scalability. So let me kind of talk to that for just a second. So when we talk about, these buckets of content, we're creating these buckets of content, but, the content query web part by default is only going to work within a single site collection. I mean, there are third-party tools that allow you to, go beyond a single site collection. There's other customizations you can do that would allow you to go beyond a single site collection and break out those barriers. But out of the box, your ability to do, if you have a piece of content, let's say you want to tag it and you wanted to roll it up into all different places, it was challenging because there's performance issues in terms of doing really, really broad queries with the content query web part. So if you went and said, I have this one piece of content, I want it to show up in 20 different places, that potentially meant you had to have 20 different content query web parts all doing different manners of queries. And the general guidance was that the content query web part can be a large resource hog if our queries were too wide. So the recommendation was normally to kind of tightly restrict the type of content that we were rolling up. So if you had a press release and you had, like, let's say, 20 sites, and that press release was all of a specific content type. Let's say it was like Contoso press release was your content type, and you had a content query web part that was sitting at the root of your site, and you said, roll up everything from all sites that match this content type. You're talking about a really broad query, and there's plenty of stories where that causes real big problems. So that limited content reuse, because you ended up having to do really hyper-specific queries, and you had scalability and performance issues on large sites. And yes, some of you are probably sitting out there saying, well, can't you get some benefits from caching and things like that? And yes, you can, but still, it's very real issue there. Limited content use, scalability. So this is kind of my really pretty graphic that I made. And I showed this to my colleague Randy Driscoll. If Randy's a branding guy or whatever, and he looked at this and he looked at it and he said, "Is that Comic Sans font that you have on that?" And I said, "Well, I made it with Balsamic, and Balsamic, if you've ever used that, their default font choice that they have was actually Comic Sans, and I think they basically, went to something else. So if there's any designery people listening to me talk right now, go easy on me." So, but basically, I wanted to kind of illustrate that scenario of what I was talking about. So here in this case, what I'm doing is I'm thinking in my scenario that marketing is generating all of my content, because we all know that marketing are the people who write all the flowery stuff, and they're wonderful at writing. So they're obviously the ones in your organization that are generating all of the content. So in this case, they've got 8 items that they're creating. And in our scenario, we've got a single site collection, okay? Marketing, and then we've got our homepage, our product site, our services site, whatever. They're all making content, whatever. And it's all all of this content is being rolled up to these different sites via the content query web part. So I've kind of made some assumptions here. So we're going to assume that we've got, all of my items are tagged with custom metadata, so that that's how we're determining what's hitting the filter on the home page versus the product site and the services site and everything like that. But like I said, with broad filters, depending on how we're doing that, we're limited from a performance perspective. And a lot of cases you're pretty much isolated to these large buckets. So we have our content use stuff. So fast forward to the current version of 2013. There's some big changes that have happened that are going to change the way that we think about web content management in SharePoint 2013. So the biggest thing, and this is going to be one of the primary things that I'm going to be talking about today, is that search is now going to be the primary mechanism that's driving web content management. So just very briefly, before I go into that too fast, I just want to say what I'll call web content management classic, the model that I just showed you, still exists. So if you have a scenario where you're using that today or it works just fine, that's still there. It's not going away. It still exists, and I still think that there's going to be some good discussions around, when does it make sense to use the classic model, because it's not old, it's classic. So when are we going to use the classic model versus the new model? So anyway, fast forwarding over to the new model. New model, search is going to be the primary mechanism that's going to drive this new web content management stuff. Back in SharePoint 2010, we had a separate thing that we'd refer to as SharePoint search, and then we also had an advanced kind of search option that you had, which was fast. Now, fast is the engine that is the SharePoint search engine, which opens up tons of possibilities in terms of scalability, performance, and also what it is that we're able to do with some of these things. So kind of the moral of the story, though, is as long as you can index content and get the content that you're creating into your search engine, you can roll it up. So the first step is going to be, we got all this content. It could be SharePoint content. It could be other content from other places. Get it into the index. Once it's in the index, you can leverage what's called the content by search web part, or the CBS. What all this means is that it is really it ends up being really similar from a content management perspective than to a lot of the other content management applications that are not SharePoint. We've got this. We're putting data in. We're tagging it with metadata, and we're able to surface it wherever we want. So we've limiting factor, like I said, is our index. So if we have content in across multiple sites, multiple site collections, or even potentially multiple web applications, as long as it's all getting into our index, we can roll it up. So from a performance perspective, if you've ever done any searches in SharePoint, you go in and you type in something and you get results back, it's pretty fast. I mean, there's little, there's search stats that come back that tell you how fast that those searches are executed. So when you're talking about querying lots amount of data, search is has far better performance, and because of the fast architecture and just the new architecture that comes around search scalability. That issue that we had with content query web part being, if our queries were too specific or something that it caused performance problems, now we can just scale up or scale out our servers. So there's if you went to Shane and Todd's session, or you've ever heard, an architecture talk, we now have the ability to leverage kind of that fast architecture where we can add more query servers, we can add more index servers, we can add, bolt on additional servers into our to help support these new things. So going back to my pretty drawing that I made with all the wonderful colors and the Comic Sans font that you're not going to make fun of me for, you can kind of see this scenario that we got here. Basically same site structure, but in this case, homepage, product site, services site, marketing. This could be whatever we want in our farm. So these could all be separate site collections, what have you. So we have our marketing people are still doing a great job at creating all of our content. We have our servers, our search servers are going to go out and crawl that information, and they're going to pull it into the index in the same way that they always have, right? And then once it's there, we're going to have a CBS web part on every single one of those pages that are going to roll that content up. Much more performant, like I said, than in the past. So I kind of just broached the topic of how this is all talking. I want to go back and address something that I think is really important. A couple years ago, I went and I got pulled in to be doing a presentation. It's kind of pretty soon after the whole FAST acquisition happened with Microsoft, and I got thrown into doing a presentation that was a SharePoint search and fast search presentation, and I ended up having to work with a fast architect. And so we got on the phone, super nice guys, you know, nothing but great things to say. But it was clear at the very beginning of at the beginning of our talking that we viewed search very differently. Now, you know, the end of it came down to the fact that the way that I viewed search, what they said was, you know, in their words, and this is almost a direct quote, was they said, you know, the way your view on search is basically back in the 90s, and we've kind of moved on beyond then into a more modern view of searching. I said, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, the way you think about searching primarily is keyword searching. And what keyword searching means is that's like going in and typing you know, saying, I'm going to search for dog food, and I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to get back results about dog food. That's what keyword searching is. That's what most of us do on the internet whenever we go to Bing or Google or whatever your favorite search engine is, or even SharePoint. Most of you are going to go in and type in a result, hit enter, and you're going to get results. That's keyword searching, which is fine. It exists, it works, and it's always going to be a very important part of what we do. But if we think to kind of the more modern way of viewing things, and what SharePoint is bringing to the table from a web content management perspective, we've got to start thinking about what would be called search-driven content. So this would be this idea of using a search engine to drive content to the page. So it's a little bit different, but I think it's something that you guys have probably seen all across the internet. BestBuy.com is a great example. The guy that I was working with to that was, you know, learning me on all this great information was actually one of the architects for FAST that was working on BestBuy.com. So FAST is a search engine that drives BestBuy.com's product catalog. You go out there, you type in Xbox, and when you type in Xbox, you get back results. And there's some dynamic things that happen. And, you know, in other words, like even whenever you go onto some of the product pages, like when you click on the like TVs on Best Buy, the content that you see on the page is driven from, you know, is driven to the page from search. There's not like a content query web part out there. There's, you know, search is drawing those results on the page. Zappos.com is another example. Amazon.com. When you go to those sites, you know, you may notice that, you know, if we look down here in the middle of the page there, you see how it says shopping recommendations for you. Well, how does it know? It knows because I've gone to that. I've gone and looked for apparently some of those shoes or something like that. I have no idea why it's suggesting those for me, but like there's been times whenever I've been shopping for Christmas presents on Amazon and I've looked at like a bunch of Hello Kitty stuff for my 4-year-old daughter, and the next time I go back to Amazon.com, the whole homepage is full of nothing but Hello Kitty stuff because that's where I went. And it starts, the more I go and the more it kind of sees what my shopping preferences are, the more it's able to leverage its search capabilities and dynamically push content that it thinks is relevant to me. And so this is an extremely powerful way to think about content management. And this is something that the door is open wide for us to do these types of things with SharePoint 2013. So kind of how are we going to look at this new modern web content management? Well, I got a question here. Let me answer the question. Let me see here. I'm not really an expert with dealing with this, so let me see. Let's see. The question is, it says we want to drive search-driven content that has been tagged and not just full text searching. Is this possible? Is this possible in SharePoint 2010 out of the box? So I'm gonna hold that thought for just a second. Let me explain this, and then I'm gonna come back and I will explain to you what I mean, or how to. I'm gonna answer your question. So so basically, how do we drive this content into this new web content management in 2013? Well, the primary mechanism, like I said, we're going to index content. Once we get it in the index, we're going to go in and we're going to use a content by search web part that's going to take our results back. So one of the ways that you can kind of think about the CBS is that if you're familiar with either the content query web part or the search, the core results web part in 2010, the results that came back were styled based on XSLT, and I know all of you are huge XSLT fans. So Microsoft kind of knew that there's a lot of folks out there that kind of had mixed feelings about XSLT, XSLT. So the way that they're going to be styling search results and the CBS and other things, even the refinement panel in 2013, is via display templates. Display templates are a combination of HTML and JavaScript that that allow you to like customize the display. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you one of these in just a second. But essentially, you search the content. You go ahead and set some filters, and then based on the results that come back, you can style them based on the display template that you pick. So it's pretty cool and pretty flexible. But once we do, so that's kind of the primary mechanism for getting content out. In terms of getting content in, we would go in and we would create a list or a library, and we would go ahead and enable what's called cross-site publishing. Cross-site publishing allows you to take any list or library and make it available for other areas, for other sites to consume. So things like you can think about this as like a content repository or a product catalog, and that's an example that I'm going to show you in just a second. So you go ahead, you fill up this list, and I have a post on my blog that kind of talks about some of this. If you go ahead and fill out all this stuff, just load up a list basically, and then from there you say I want it to be a catalog. You set some properties on it. My blog post kind of covers that. It's kind of a long, boring kind of process that I'm not really going to get into here in the context of this presentation. But once you do that, and whenever you create your list and library, you're going to fill that with metadata, and in some cases you're probably going to want to take advantage of managed metadata, which was a concept in 2010. It still exists. In fact, it's been expanded for 2013 to do more and great stuff. So we've still got the ability to tag documents the way that we did. And so to answer Paul's question, who just asked it, yeah, the primary mechanism that you're going to use to determine what content has been rolled up is going to be the way that you tag it. So we're going to be able to tag stuff the good old-fashioned way, like any of the old ways that we used to do it with 2010. But we also have we can still leverage managed metadata, which is probably going to be even more important. And it's going to be necessary in some cases to do some of these things, like when you create a product catalog or a catalog site, it's going to ask you to have some sort of hierarchical metadata field that you'll be able to tag. But I make a mention on here about metadata navigation, and I make a mention that it's no longer an afterthought. And what I'm getting at there is that in the past it was kind of optional. Like some people, we do manage metadata sometimes, other times we wouldn't do it, whatever. But it was kind of one of those things. If it was, we might just kind of pass on it. But that's not really going to be the case moving forward. It's going to manage metadata, and the way that we view metadata is going to be something that's going to be important for us to look at. So let me get through a couple more of these slides, and I'll hop over and I'll kind of show you a quick demo. But another big change, and I would bet if I was standing if you all were live and in front of me, this would be something that would probably elicit a decent reaction to. But one of the most common comments that people have had around SharePoint has been the URLs. I know in many cases, I used to blog on SharePoint, and I know that there might still be some of my colleagues still blog on SharePoint, and maybe some of you that are on the call would blog on SharePoint. But one of my biggest beefs with SharePoint in general was the way that URLs worked. Right? You would go and if you've ever clicked on a post, you get that post ID equals blah 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 GWID whatever. It's not great. It's all and even when we talk about WCM side of things, we've always got the URL / pages / whatever, and there really wasn't a great way for us to kind of deal with that. It was a common complaint. Nothing wrong with it, but always something that people complain about. But the general feeling was that URLs don't look good. So kind of let's move forward to SharePoint 2013. I mean, the first example is an actual URL to a piece of content that I have that in my demo machine, and this URL is not too far off about some good comments coming in. So coming in, so some of the comments that we have, or some of the URLs, we have these really long, verbose emails that come in, but we have the ability to leverage what would be a clean URL, which would be something like this. So this content at the top right here that has this really nasty, ugly URL, we can have it surfaced over as kind of this more clean thing. So the key takeaway here is that we're able to abstract the content itself from the presentation, which is a huge thing. We've got this ability where we can have our product catalogs that are, containing all of our information or whatever, and whenever we connect them in to, whenever we say, hey, let's do the cross-site publishing and let's connect it, we want to surface it over in this root site like I have here called Portal Contoso, we can tell it to either reference the content where it lives like this, if we really want it to, or we can say use a friendly URL or a clean URL, whatever it is that your whatever your thought is, and it renders like this. So what happens is, and I'll show it to you. I'm going to show you this in just a second. But when we go here, SharePoint just rewrites the URL. It shows me the same content, but the content itself looks relative to the site where it was in, as opposed to making me hop to a completely other place. In this case, I'm actually hopping web applications. I'm obviously hopping AAMs. So to Angela asked the question. Sorry. What about pages? Don't have to do pages potentially. So don't believe me? I'll show you here. So this is over here. This is my really not too exciting SharePoint site that we've got here. It's not really branded or anything too crazy. But I kind of wanted to just show you an example of how this all works. So you can kind of read the nitty-gritty details if you want on my blog, and it kind of goes into more stuff. But if you've ever happened to read my branding book that co-wrote with Randy Driscoll, we big fans of breakfast and all things breakfast. So I thought, hey, let's keep the breakfast thing going, and let's create a catalog with a whole bunch of breakfast food in it. So here's all this fun stuff. I see someone's very excited by toast. This is what I would consider the perfect food here, which is fried chicken and waffles. And other people are very excited about bacon. There's definitely bacon here. So anyway, all we've done here is we've gone into Central Admin. We go to create a site collection, and then we go down here under publishing, and I've created a product catalog. I let it spin, do all its fun things. It makes this site. And then from there, by default, it has a products list already. So I'm going to go in the products list, and to answer the previous question about some of this stuff, yeah, sorry, breakfast food is pretty interesting. Sorry about making people hungry, but it could be worse. I could repulse you by the images that I have. But basically, in this case, I pretty much used the out-of-the-box stuff. The only change that I made is that by default, whenever you create one of these products lists, the default product list is just regular text, which is not really super great. I wanted an image in mine. So what I did, whenever I went into my list, I actually am inheriting the product with image, content type. So there's a product, a product content type and a product with image. Shockingly, the difference is the product with image actually has an image on it. Awesome, huh? So I use product image. In my case, I actually, because I'm kind of neurotic about some of this stuff, I actually basically use product with image as the base content type and just created a custom products content type and went ahead and did that. So I added any custom fields that I had, but for the most part, I just went with the generic ones. We've got a bunch of just normal fields, and there's nothing really too exciting here. The one thing I will point out is that item category is a managed metadata field that's pulling from a term set. So I went in, I created a term set, did whatever. So if you're trying to repeat these steps at home, the one thing that I would say, go ahead and do all these steps, fill up your, create your managed metadata, fill up your list. After you do that, remember, we're talking about now search driving our content management. So after you do all of this stuff, you need to run an index. You need to go in and fill the content in with your custom fields and all that, and then you're going to have to run an index to make sure that all of these fields and any custom stuff that you're doing get populated into our index, or these days what it's called search schema. Another little gotcha that I will point out is that by default this is a publishing list, which requires all things to be checked in. So if you do what I did the first time you do it and fill out everything and then can't figure out why none of your custom fields are being added, it very well may be that you haven't checked in everything. So go fill out all this stuff, check it in, run an index. Awesome. So once you do that, the next thing that you're going to want to do is you'll go to your list settings here. And when we look at our list settings specifically on this, you can go down to this new thing here called catalog settings. So with catalog settings, all you got to do is go here and say you want to share this list as a catalog for other sites and site collections. And once you do that, you're going to want to go ahead and you need to make a field that you're going to use as a unique identifier that's going to be used for some of the stuff that for some of the URL stuff, and just so it can identify one thing as one item as unique from another. This is kind of, let's call it your key, right? So you go ahead and you pick this. You can actually have up to 5 fields if you really have that complex of a thing to say these 5 things are all going to work together to determine what's unique. But for the most part, I'm just rolling with ID. Works fine for me. And then from there, you're also going to want to make sure that you have a field that's going to be used for catalog navigation. I'll show you that in just a second. But the catalog navigation, this field needs to be a managed metadata field. So if you don't have that, it's going to get angry at you. Trust me, I've tried. So after we do all of those other things, this is another time whenever you would have to run an index. You can kind of wait, and you could kind of wait to set your list as an index before you run the crawl. That's kind of the method that I advocate. But what you're going to do basically is go in, set it as a catalog, run an index, and then once you do that, you'll go back to the site collection that you want to actually consume your catalog. So if we do that, I'll go back to my portal site, and we're going to go under Site Administration here, and then there's an option here that says Manage Catalog Connections. I've already connected this right here, and I can't really disconnect it because if I disconnect it, it'll kind of do some funny things. But let's just say that this is the first time I'm doing this. I can click on the catalog here, and you can see the options that I have. We specify a field that we want to use for our navigation hierarchy. I'll show you that in just 1 minute. Here's our option for the catalog item URL behavior, where we can either make the URLs, easy for me to say, right? Make the URLs relative to this site, or make the URLs point to the source catalog. This is where we go back to my friendly URLs discussion. I'm a big fan of making our URLs relative to the site. And then from there, we're going to pick the URL format. In this case, going to basically just use, I just use list item ID. You can, and the format kind of looks something like this. So, blah, 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 term root, term, list item ID. So you can see that whenever I click on stuff. So assuming you've done all of that, whenever you say connect and OK, what it's going to do is it'll, hook it up. But I will point out to you that if you try to connect to a catalog here, like here's one that I haven't connected to, if your catalog doesn't show up, the catalogs, shared catalogs won't show up in this list unless you run an index. So I always say I've always been a search guy. I've always been a WCM guy. I'm so thankful that the two things have kind of come together in this version. But if you haven't spent a lot of time working with search, there's a lot of, you got to get used to the fact, especially if you're going to be doing some of this WCM stuff, that you're going to have to create things, and then after you create them, you're going to have to do an index or make sure a crawl is running in order to get that stuff in there. From a dev environment perspective, I'm manually kicking off crawls. In a production environment, you might have continuous crawls running. So if you have continuous crawls running, this may happen a little bit more efficiently. And if you're not familiar with what continuous crawls are, basically it's kind of like constant indexing. But for more information on that, take a look at some of the admin talks. I'm not sure if we go into it, but it's very cool. So let's assume I've gone ahead and I've actually connected my product catalog. What you're going to notice immediately is this stuff right up here. This ignore 1, 2, 3. Those are just some test examples but these right here are coming directly from my term set. So if we go back over here and we'll go to our products catalog, you'll see I got my little French toast here, blah, 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 blah. You know, if I were to actually click on this, you'll see here's my nasty URL that I pasted in and showed you. Well, to prove that there's, you know, to kind of show you how this works, if I click on breads, which is kind of the my term set is actually broken up like into the breakfast foods is the root, and then underneath that the various term sets are breads, condiments, and meats. So if I click on breads, you'll notice that it's bringing back these results right here where you're seeing, you know, I didn't do anything for this. This is not custom in the least. This is the content by search, knowing what this is dynamically, like there is no actual breads page. Like this is basically a dynamically generated page that is kind of rolling up content, and the way it's rolling up is, you know, to kind of to the previous question, this is rolling up all content that is within that term set breads. So in this case, we've got French toast, oatmeal, pancakes, and hopefully if we go over there, waffles. But again, I've done nothing for this. So, you know, then you'll notice that when I click on French toast, there's that list ID at the end there, but I've got my friendly URL. So I have actually customized this page lightly because I was just sort of practicing with some branding stuff. But the fun fact around this is that, you know, we'll dive into the weeds just a little bit because I'm feeling kind of saucy. But whenever you go in and you create a catalog, it actually does something kind of interesting. So I'll go into View All Site Contents, and we'll go under the Pages library here. It actually automatically creates 2 pages for you. So I had a breakfast foods is my high-level term set that I created, my root term set. So when you connect a catalog, it's actually going to create 2 pages for you. So these 2 pages are actually a catalog item page and a category page. The category page is that page that I was just showing you, where that's breads, condiments, meats. So that's the page that gets created there. The catalog item page that gets created is that actual one that I was showing, that was being displayed whenever I showed you French toast. So the difference is that these are basically single pages that were created, but are dynamically showing different content based on you know, just whatever that content happens to be. So with these 2 pages, I can show you all of this stuff up here. So this is kind of a little bit different from whenever we think about the classic way of doing things, where every page was essentially created based on a page layout. So we had 1 page layout, we created a whole bunch of pages. In this case, we've got 2 pages, and just based on dynamically what we are able to pass into it through the magic of the new WCM, we can kind of show lots and lots and lots of content. So you'll notice there are 2 corresponding page layouts here. So the pages themselves are based on these page layouts, and we're still kind of working through the details about what the proper way of customizing some of this stuff if you wanted to make it look less out of the box. So stay tuned for that, and we hope to have some more information about that pretty soon. But that's kind of the gist of it. I mean, as you can see, we've got our managed metadata navigation up here, so we can add styles to that, make it look like something. And you know, we're dynamically rolling up content. We've got some options on what we can do there. So I mean, you can start thinking about the possibilities of, you know, well, what if instead of breakfast foods or something like that, like what if we wanted to manage all of our content that way? Like imagine, let's say you had, let's say you go back to the good old like news articles or something like that. Let's say you had press releases, and your press releases were related to various departments or something like that. Well, in SharePoint 2010, we had the ability where, you know, like I said, people managed content from page layouts. They went in and they filled out a page layout, it created a page, did whatever. But the page layout itself was kind of like a WYSIWYG editor. And there are times whenever we would have clients that really wanted to control that presentation, like we want to lock it down so people can only do certain things. Okay, well, with the new WCM model, we've separated content from presentation, so we actually have the ability where you could go ahead and just, you know, dump content into a, you know, this is our content. It's just list. You know, we have it's at this point it's just fields. And we go ahead and fill out these fields however we want it, and then you have your designers or your UX developers going back and controlling the presentation. And we would actually potentially have ways where we could have that same information that we're creating here and present it differently, just depending on the way that on the display template that we're using or something else. So it kind of there's some real powerful scenarios where you're creating content and then presenting it whatever different ways makes sense. So I think it's kind of cool and kind of interesting, and again, still trying to get my head around all the different possibilities. But that's kind of the gist about just from a feature set perspective. I think there's tons and tons of I just blasted through a ton of detail there, and there's so many subtleties and things like that, and so many specific hows of how do we do display templates, how do we configure and manage our content, how do we go in and how do we edit the CBS and all of these things. So those are going to be things as we move forward that I predict there's going to be lots more information out there. Hopefully going to be doing more screencasts talking about some of those specifics. But when we look at the new approach to WCM, it's really going to be just that. It's going to change the way that we approach projects, because no longer, we've got the classic model, and again, that's going to work for a lot of people, but we've got new options for us, and it's going to be leveraging content. It's going to be leveraging term sets. It's going to be leveraging all these other, great things. So planning is going to be more important than ever. Going through and making sure that our making sure of the going through the planning the managed metadata. It's not going to be an afterthought. It's going to be something we think about before we do it, because all of our content is going to be dependent on our metadata. So if our metadata is bad and we want to use this new stuff, we're not going to be able to roll stuff up. So now, and so related to that, search and WCM skill sets go hand in hand. In my case, I'm clapping my hands and I'm super excited about all this, but I've just throughout my career, or the way that things have gone for me, those have been two areas that I've spent a lot of time in. But I know just going around and talking with people and presenting at conferences and things like that, search isn't exactly, it isn't native for everybody. It's not something that everybody spends a lot of time on. So if you are a WCM person, and when I say WCM, I'm not just talking about public sites, I'm also talking about big intranets and things like that, or even normal size intranets. It's going to be new for some people that are, there tends to be a lot of people that are in search, they don't understand WCM, and the people that are in WCM don't understand search. And so it's going to be, I think it's going to be something that is going to be a great thing, but as we move forward through this whole process, it's going to be something that that everybody is going to become a little bit more comfortable with those two things, and specifically how they work together. And the primary mechanism for how they work together is display templates. It's always been something that, like for WCM stuff, we always, I always look to my UX guys to go ahead and do custom display templates and things like, custom XSLT for content query web parts. But now we've got display templates in the mix, and what are options there that your UX developers and designers are going to have to get comfortable with. So that's going to take a little bit of time. But again, how users manage content. Now we've got new options where we can manage our content independently from our presentation if that's the way that we go. So how we think about that, what our mix is, how much of our content would we want to do the classic way, and how much of our content would we want to do the new way? Is there value in using the new approach? These are all things that are going to be a little bit different for everybody. And I think because this is all such a new thing, we're all trying to get our guidelines together. But I think that we're getting there, and I think that it's just going to be something that we're all going to. How we approach these WCM projects is not going to be, hey, let's just think about all the content that we need and the various buckets that we need them to go in, and then just like have them roll up to these 5 pages. It's going to be a lot more dynamic than that, based on how we tag stuff, how we can mix and match stuff, and create much bigger, more complex sites than we ever could before. So I think that there's some really interesting discussions there. So I think so. Just kind of before I fully wrap up, I did have a couple questions here. let's see. Do you know which URL Google, Bing, etc. will read? Actual URL or friendly URL? That is a read the friendly URL. But what I want to add to that is the more complicated question is, if I've got a site, like let's say I put up, you know, randyswaffles.com or something like that, and I've got a breakfast, I've got breakfast products out the yin yang on my site, right? And on my homepage, I've got a products catalog, and all that content is being surfaced by the CBS. Well, we know that Google and Bing have problems rendering, have problems reading dynamically generated content, specifically stuff that's coming out from JavaScript. So the answer is, and I forget the terminology, but the CBS is set up in such a way that if you do have dynamically generated content, you're still going to get there's an alternate like a server-side rendering option or something like that that automatically flips over for the CBS. So if you have content that's being rolled up with the XSL, I'm sorry, with the display templates and everything and the JavaScript and HTML, it's got a way to render that content in a way that's going to be search engine friendly. So Microsoft has really spent a ton of time thinking about this and making sites that would be friendly both on the internet as well as in the intranet. So to answer your question, the URLs themselves, the friendly URLs should be fine. But again, if you have the dynamically generated content, there is a server-side rendering mode for the CBS that automatically just kind of flips over and takes and the Google and Bing take care of it. So that's something that as we progress and everything like that, I hope to have more information about. I don't really have anything that's available that's documented on that. I just know that that was a question that I've asked, and that was the answer I got back. So, just to kind of recap, times are changing, and in a lot of ways, I think this is a great step to move SharePoint closer to being what most of the rest of the industry is looking at from a content management platform. I thought it was pretty good as a content management platform in 2010, but a lot of the WCM purists out there had a lot of beefs, and I mean I think myself there were some challenges for how some of the content could roll up and some of the limitations there. We got by, but it's way better now. Tons of new options are available for SharePoint Server 2013. And there's really we got to get in that mindset that there's going to be there's still going to be keyword searching. It's going to be an important way that people are going to find stuff in your enterprise and in your organization. But from a search-driven perspective, we can now do more stuff with search, get content onto the page with search, and start doing smart things. Like I mean, we can imagine a scenario where, let's say, depending on what department you happen to be in your organization, the content that's being drawn onto the page for you could look completely different based on, what department you come from. So HR people, as they browse through your intranet, could see one set of content. People in sales could see something different, and we know all the IT people are, extra awesome, so they're going to get all the dancing unicorns and everything like that are going to be like, the cool, awesome stuff. So, I mean, that's not necessarily out of the box or whatever, but I think you can start to see and understand the power that's going to come with search-driven content. And it's kind of a new thing that I'm excited to see come to SharePoint. I think it's going to open up lots of new doors, but it's also going to evolve the way that we are doing and approaching projects. And I think that initially, there's still a lot of questions around how all that's going to work, but I feel good that as the life cycle of this product improves or moves on, I think there's going to be tons of great new stuff that are going to be out there, and the community has always been awesome around SharePoint. Lots of good information sharing, and again, we've got SharePoint conference coming up here in a few months, so I think there's going to be lots more talking about a lot of this stuff coming out. But I'm super excited. Hopefully we're going to be talking a lot more about this stuff. You can take a look at my blog, or where I kind of go into a high-level detail about some of the things I talked about. You can always keep up with me on Twitter. Or if you have any questions, feel free to email me directly at john.ross@rackspace.com. Happy to keep some of the discussion going if there's anything else that I didn't cover. But if there's any other questions that anybody has, I'll hang out for a little bit and answer any of those questions. But if not, thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it, and stick around. We got a couple. We do have a couple more screencasts tomorrow. So be sure to watch on Twitter and keep your eyes peeled for that. So thanks, guys. I hope you have a good rest of your Thursday.